Hello team, welcome to another ATP Geopolitics video with myself, Jonathan MS Peers. This is a European political update. You can say it pertains to the Ukraine war as well, and European security and unity in general too. We're going to talk about the Czech election that is taking place right now. And it has quite a lot of importance for all of the aforementioned things, because there is a chance that Czechia is going to take a big step to the populist right, and that will be a Eurosceptic right and a pro-Russian right and an anti-Ukrainian right, unfortunately. It's not always the case that the right wing is those things, particularly the centre right, but you start moving into the populist right, and it seems to be a very common trend that they're more likely to be aligned with Russian ideals, and that could be because they're likely to be Eurosceptic as well, sceptical of the EU, wanting to move away from that. Anyway, you can see at the moment the latest polls, according to Politico, look good for this party, the ANO, at the top there, 30%. With 19% being where Spolu are at the moment, SPD on 13%, and then Stan 11, Pirates 10, and then others down below that. We're going to look at who these parties are and see what it all means, just in a quick update for you. And I'm going to be referring to a chap called František Kalenda, who does pretty good synopses of the Czech elections. He said yesterday, today and tomorrow, people in the Czech Republic are voting in key parliamentary elections. After 4 years of centre-right government led by Prime Minister Petr Fiala, it's more likely than not that he will be replaced by Andrej Babiš, former Prime Minister and head of the populist ANO party. That's these guys at the top. ANO is currently leading in every poll, and their potential coalition partners from both the far right and the far left appear poised to enter parliament. Babis was already highly controversial in the past when he served first as Minister of Finance in 2014 to 17 and then as Prime Minister 2017 to 2021. Among other things, he's a former agent of the Communist Secret Service and an oligarch with massive influence in various sectors, especially agriculture, who clearly entered politics to secure more public and European funding for his companies. Yet he still presented himself as a relatively pro-Western and pro-European politician. For instance, he claimed, this is previously, to be a friend of Emmanuel Macron, and ANO was part of the liberal faction in the European Parliament. So remember, when you get into European politics and members of the European Parliament, you represent your own political parties back in your own country, but those parties don't exist outside your own country's borders. So say you have, 12 MEPs from the JP party. I then look to what other parties around Europe and from other countries are most aligned to my politics or our politics in the JP party. And it turns out that's this party in France, and maybe that party in Sweden, and that party over there in Belgium. And then we see, if those parties are in a coalition, then basically you have coalitions of MEPs from similar kind of areas, similar political areas, operating. These coalitions obviously cross borders, right? And the coalition that the ANO used to be in was the liberal faction. That means liberal, kind of classical liberalism, or actually kind of centrist, marginally to the right of centre, of Emmanuel Macron in the European Parliament. That's where ANO were. But however, times have changed, and Babis has switched his party's allegiance to the Patriots for Europe, which are better described as Patriots for Russia. So this faction he co-founded, so Babis co-founded this faction with none other than Viktor Orbán, his political model and also generous sponsor of his companies in Hungary. He has also begun attacking Ukrainian refugees and military aid to Ukraine, questioning Czech obligations within NATO by saying he would refuse to help Poland if it were invaded by Russia, and more broadly adopting anti-Western rhetoric. Even worse, his potential allies from both the extreme right, the SPD, and the far left, Stasilo, mostly made up of former Communist Party members, are openly pro-Russian in every possible way. So the far right ultranationalists and the far left communists are essentially all pro-Russian. So Russia has really got into bed with fascistic ultranationalism right across Eastern Europe. And it's no different in Czechia, whilst also maintaining control over, obviously, the Communist Party there, so the far left too. And they're both openly pro-Russian in every possible way, spreading literal translations of Russian propaganda and questioning Czech membership in NATO and the EU. If Babis and his potential coalition partners indeed win a majority in parliament by tomorrow, significant changes in Czech domestic and foreign policy should be expected. The most probable scenario is a partial Orbánization of Czech politics and alignment with Hungary, Slovakia, and of course Russia and China in the coming years. Okay, so if you can see here, we have the SPD on 13% and Stasilo on 7%. So these are your, the red one there is your, oh, you can't see that. The red ones down here on 7% are your Communist Party, and the 13% SPD, which is itself a coalition of far-right parties. As you can see, there are 4 far-right parties there going into coalition to create 13% of the electorate there. And they are really quite far-right. ANO could arguably be labelled as a kind of centre-right populist party, but I think generally, you know, if you're aligning yourself pretty full on with Viktor Orbán, you know where that's going. So you've got 19% is where the present centre right is, and then you've got like the Pirate Party here, the left wing, the centre left, and then other parties as well. Okay, so it's not looking great, is it, for Ukraine and for European unity. He said with an update here, update so far, the voter turnout seems to be higher than 4 years ago, which is in stark contrast with the expectations that some voters of the current government will be demotivated and stay home. Higher turnout, especially in bigger cities. So remember, we talk about the rural-urban divide. Urban areas are usually more kind of left-wing or centrist. You're likely to have in large metropolitan urban areas, you're going to have more immigration, you're going to have more intellectuals of the kind of your intellectual class who generally will be more liberal. And so if you get a high turnout in city areas, that's generally going to be good for, in this case, EU and Ukraine. So higher turnout, especially in bigger cities, gives some hopes to the democratic parties. Turnout increase in smaller towns and certain economically weaker regions, on the other hand, favour populist and extremist parties and candidates, as we saw in the 2018 presidential election, for instance. And I totally agree with that. I've been talking about that a lot in my previous political videos. So he gives a breakdown of the different parties here. So let's just go into this. Here's my brief guide to the main political parties, their stances, leaders and prospects. All of the parties have chances to enter the parliament based on the polls. However, Auto and Stasilo have been hovering around a 5% minimum threshold. So let's go back to where we were. Auto and Stasilo being the communist lot. They appear to be on 7%. Auto, they're on 6%. So 2%, by the looks of it, they won't get in. So that would be annoying. If I don't know who these people are, but you'd be like, don't bother voting because you're not going to get over the threshold and that's a wasted vote. So go and put your vote into whoever else you're more aligned with, or you are equally aligned with, or somewhat aligned with. Right. Okay. So ANO, Alliance of Independent Citizens, by far the largest political party in the country, led by the former Prime Minister and billionaire Andrej Babiš. ANO has no identity of its own. It serves to parrot whatever Babis says and thinks at the moment. So it started as a liberal political movement, but then turned staunchly nationalistic and anti-European, which forced many of its former elected representatives to leave the party. Today, ANO stands for the promise of delivering more subsidies to its core group of voters. Elderly people, very commonly, the more elderly you get, the more conservative you get. So that could be the case there, and for protecting business interests of Babis. Spolu together, in fact, 3 political parties that joined forces in order to depose Babis in 2021: Eurosceptic ODS, pro-European Top 09, and conservative Christian CDU CSL. Current Prime Minister Petr Fiala is from the ODS, which is Eurosceptic, interesting, representing more moderate and consensual wing of the party. However, another wing of the ODS wishes to break up Spolu and might even join forces with Babis if the election result is especially bad for the coalition. Stan, Mayors and Independents, another part of the current governing coalition, mostly rooted in local and regional structures, predominantly liberal and pro-European, but with certain unpredictable members at the local level, recently weakened by a major corruption scandal. Pirates, originally party of protest, joined government in 2021 as part of the anti-Babis coalition, but was forced to exit last year after a failed digitalisation project. Another pro-European liberal formation, economically mostly centre-left. In this elections, they joined forces with the Green Party and showed unexpected energy during the campaign. Their result might be the biggest surprise of this election, as they have been rising consistently in the polls. SPD, Freedom and Direct Democracy, political and business project of Tomio Okamura, based primarily on hatred of refugees, both Muslim and Ukrainian, and European Union. SPD has close relations with other far-right parties in Europe, especially Le Pen and Wilders, and wishes to leave the EU and perhaps NATO. It has openly defended Russian positions on Ukraine and beyond, spreading literal translations of Russian propaganda. Stasilo Enough is a political coalition built around alliance between the Communist Party, ousted from parliament in 2021, and pro-Russian anti-vaxxer trolls. It also incorporated remains of the old Social Democratic Party, forcing 1/3 of its members to leave. Candidates of Stasilo come up with some of the most extreme positions, including change of regime and banning current governing party. They are also routinely praise Russia, including even the 1968 occupation of Czechoslovakia. Stasilo is staunchly pro-Russian, nostalgic of the former communist period, and wishes for Czechia to exit both the EU and NATO. Alto, motorists for themselves. Slightly bizarre formation based on defending the old world against green transformation and EU regulations. Its most famous personality is former social media influencer popular with young boys Filip Turek, but the party is actually controlled by people very close to former President Václav Klaus. Klaus has been probably the most outspoken defender of Russia in the public space, even directly after the invasion of Ukraine, and representatives of Alto in the European Parliament vote routinely against motions to aid Ukraine or criticising current Russian regime. So actually, Alto can go and do one. If we go back to here, you've got an awful lot of... So Alto, Stasilo, SPD and ANO, they're all like either nut job right or nut job left. And there's a very small kind of centre right here, 19%, centre left, Stan on 11%, and the Pirates on 10%, if I am correct in saying that Stan were centre left. Let's go back with the Stan, where do we have them? Stan, yeah, so they're the localized one, weren't they? So that's all fairly scary stuff in my books. He goes on to say, if you're wondering why so many Czechs vote for pro-Russian parties, here's my complex answer to the question. So let's just go very quickly into that, because I think that is worth understanding too. I often get this question, it deserves a complex answer. First of all, it's worth making a difference between voters of ANO, populist party of ex-Prime Minister Babis, and more fringe parties that might end up in government with him. While ANO's moved much more openly towards Russian narratives concerning Ukrainian refugees, European integration, or our NATO commitments, it still doesn't dare to openly question Czech membership in EU and NATO. Voters of ANO are largely non-political, motivated by economic struggles that got even worse in the past couple of years with the inflation and significant rise in energy prices. They are very often elderly and expect significant rise in pensions and other state support from Babis. Geopolitical considerations for these voters are almost non-existent. They might not even reflect on whether Czechia belongs to East or West. Alternatively, they might believe our country should be a bridge between the two, and Babis managed to make them worried about getting dragged into a foreign war. Voters of the extremist SPD, far right, and Stasilo, far left, on the other hand, are much more openly pro-Russian in their thinking. but they're only a minority of in a population, around 10 to 20% of Czechs. Still, that's pretty sizable. Some of them, especially voters of Stasilo, subscribe to old communist narratives and see Russia as a friendly power compared to aggressive West. They're nostalgic for times of the communist government and especially for relative economic security. Then there's a small group of pan-Slavic enthusiasts believing in some sort of brotherly relationship with Russia. They might be influenced by borderline Nazi ideologies and neo-paganism, and certainly consume enormous amounts of Russian propaganda. Finally, there's people who fear alleged Islamization of Western Europe, are afraid of terrorist attacks and threats to Czech traditional identity and way of life. These people, often also hateful of sexual minorities, were fed propaganda claiming Russia is some sort of white Christian and traditionalist society. I hope this helps to further understanding of this incredibly complicated topic, says Calendar. Very useful. Thank you very much. I mean, broadly speaking, my opinion would be this as a pithy kind of summary from someone. Today, my country is electing a new government. I like this picture, by the way. Is electing a new government. The outcome is uncertain, and there is a risk that Czechia may align itself with pro-Russian countries such as Slovakia and Hungary. I ask Europe, if this happens, please do not turn your back on this beautiful country. This nation is full of honourable, democratically minded people who support Ukraine, and in the event of an electoral defeat, they will need to see that. Even if European leaders distance themselves from our politicians, they will never forget the Czech people. In 4 years, there will hopefully be another election, and we will once again have the chance to return to the side of European values. But now, good luck, Czechia. The far right and the far left appear to be incredibly aligned. It's a kind of, I guess, authoritarian horseshoe kind of moment where, they join at the top there, the far left and the far right, and there they are. So just a reminder for Czech readers, said Jonia Skola, even if it won't have an impact, Babis and ANO are part of Orbán's Patriots for Europe, a traitorous pro-Russian group in the European Parliament. A vote for Babis is a vote for Putin's favoured candidate and for Putin. Yeah. Now, I'm just going to leave you with this. So they're voting today. We'll see how that goes. In about 4 hours, said Derek Tainus, after more than 300 consecutive days of protests and just as many consecutive days of regime brutality, people from all across Georgia are heading en masse towards the capital city for a demonstration intended to be a peaceful revolution. Russia can and must be defeated in Georgia. Good luck, brave people. And indeed, there is evidence that there is a pretty substantial number of people coalescing in Tbilisi, the capital of Georgia today. Very impressive crowd marching through central Tbilisi, said Tim White today. They've travelled far and wide for the demonstration to give power to the people. It coincides with the farcical mayoral elections. Having seen the parliamentary elections rigged, the people gave up on trusting Russia's puppet regime. And I believe that there are people coming from far and wide in Georgia to this demonstration there. Ukrainian flags flying as well. So good stuff there. Okay, so that is enough from me. That's a little bit of an insight into the Czech elections. Fingers crossed that goes well as it possibly can, but I am somewhat concerned about the Czech outcomes, and good luck to the people demonstrating in Georgia wanting democracy there. I mean, Czechia could look to Georgia there and say, well, look, is this the direction you want to go in? They could look to Orbán's Hungary and say, look, Hungary is now one of the most corrupt regimes in Europe and the economy there is tanking. Is that what you want, Czechia? Because that's what you're going to get. But, disinformation does so much damage. Anyway, that's enough from me. Take care, guys. Speak to you soon.